he's a reasonable proxy. And you're right, it should all go through the DRB, but before you get to the DRB, he's not a bad person to run it by.
Yeah, and I'm sure
He knows the parties.
So
Yeah.
I'm also curious though about the traffic pattern alterations. Who's the one who authorizes that it's okay for how many more cars are going to be on Wainwright? And is that something that could be a deal breaker for the other communities to feel like now we have, you know, a considerable amount of traffic?
You want to talk about the Fairfax engineering studies that will be required as part of the
well, there
solution?
will be. I mean, I'm not,
So
we have other people who are more familiar with Fairfax. I'm more a Maryland guy. But I mean, yeah, in general, there would have to be some traffic studies as you go before your DRB and get your approvals.
So one of the
Yeah,
things that the Property Development Committee learned in the interviews that they did with the law firms was what all the mechanics are of those processes. And one of the elements that the developer will have to submit to Fairfax County as part of the package seeking a permit are engineering, traffic studies, and so on and so forth. So those are all part of what the developer has to pay for, have the studies done, show the impact of the additional, we're talking 25
Yeah,
units potentially.
yeah, it's not going to be,
25
It won't be
cars.
that much?
no.
Okay.
The peak hour is probably not going to be, the intersections don't seem overloaded at all, so, yeah. But again, that's money the developer has to spend after he signed up with you,
Okay.
and that's why he needs to know kind of what he's going to, how the community feels before he, you know, starts roaring in there, spending money on traffic consultants, soil consultants, environmental, the civil engineer to lay it out, the architect to, you know, do some concept plans, et cetera.
Okay.
So anyway, it was a brief memo because I really thought that you need to sort of step back and, you know, look at it. Our recommendation is to the community work somewhat independently before you sign somebody up. I'm not sure who you're gonna talk to, or I have no idea, but if anybody says, sure, it's no problem, I'll just take it from here, well, just make sure you control the process and that you know what you're gonna get.
One more question. Your $100,000 per lot guesstimate?
Yeah.
Is that kind of a, just because it's a round figure number to use, or is it, you know, really fairly accurate, or maybe a low ball, or?
I think it's fairly accurate. You know, we didn't do a major market study. We
Okay.
would do more if we broker this. We looked at sales in the neighborhood, you know, and see what they're getting and understanding kind of a ratio. We looked at, we know that the townhouses in your community are going for about 200, 190 to 200, something like that we're seeing. But you can easily see 400 in some of the townhouses nearby. And these would probably be narrower. I mean, if you go the townhouse route, it's probably gonna be like a 20-foot wide rear lift. That's the max, that'll help you maximize the density. Because then you don't have a bunch of driveways, et cetera. And you can get 2 cars under the house.
And we actually ran all those numbers with Tom and Steve when they came and did the initial presentation. You may remember we talked about what we thought new construction would sell for
Yeah.
per square foot, what the various costs were. And I think the final number that you came down to was that there would be somewhere around 120 to 140,000 a unit potentially for Vantage Hill as a profit. So 100,000 for a smaller unit, now that he's looked at the land, now that he's seen the site, now that he's done some, it's sort of within the zone
Okay.
Yeah.
of what they thought. We have all that math, so we can look at that again to make sure that when we're talking about what we're getting for it, we're getting our full share.
And that math appears in a set of minutes.
Yeah, and we're happy to help you identify that as we go forward. And when we did the offering, we may actually suggest a price. We can decide how we want to handle that. If we want to just go out
Yeah,
there and
well-
solicit proposals.
Yeah, I think if in the event that the volunteer helping advising the board has any input, I will recommend that we start high
We can see, yeah, right, I understand,
That was so much easier to negotiate upwards.
yeah. That's right. Oh, let me
That's
off
a question.
So, sure,
The marketing portion, once you get the concept and now we're going to developers to solicit proposals.
yes,
How does that work? I mean, you put together the book that you mentioned, you
Right.
send it out to does it broad to everybody or?
we need to talk to you about it and decide who's best for it, and it depends on how big the project ends up. We're not adverse to sending it to, broadly.
Yeah.
Um,
And you help us evaluate the
Oh, yeah.
proposals?
Yes, we'll lay them all out and we'll do a matrix and compare them and all that stuff, which is part of the brokerage service, part of this. Consulting's over, brokerage is,
So how about you walk us through the money part? So you've come up with some numbers, what you think an engineer would cost, a rendering, some consulting time for you guys for 4 months. You know from our previous meeting, we're not wanting to we're wanting to minimize any cash that we put out. In your document, you talked a little bit about how you thought you'd approach that. Tell us, walk us through what your proposal is.
okay, well, we want to be sure that you're committed to it, we're committed to it, and we're bound together. So we would need, we would want an agreement, to provide those services. Now, it's more than, likely that when a developer comes in, and is identified, and they'll do their study period. So let's just walk through the process. But anyway, at the end of their study period, they would probably release deposit. And some of that would recoup this cost easily. I mean, we're talking 5 or 10% deposits. But the process would be you're going through this 4-month period, which we think is 4 months, to identify what is feasible, generally feasible from an engineering perspective on the site, and what the community wants. Now, there may be a hiatus there. If it worked and the community needs to think it through, that's strictly up to you. Then after that, there would be a contracting period. We would assist in that as part of the brokerage service. We would help the developer or the buyer would prepare a contract. We would assist in the evaluation of that contract and give you tons of advice on what needs to be in the contract. The contract would include an exhibit to the contract would be architectural criteria, which was to answer your point. Again, it isn't going to be the community can veto it. It's going to be, we don't want it to be higher than this. We want it to be dark brown materials and dark brown window frames, and we want flagstone lead walks and sidewalks, or what sidewalks to be this material or whatever we mutually decide is important. So you would do a contract that generally takes a couple months. Then they'll probably take 60 days or so to, after the contract is signed, to do their feasibility and line up their financing. So at the end of that 2-month period, they would give you a deposit, which could be probably cash, possibly a letter of credit, which is just a bank promise to pay. I think you would want some cash to get rid of this, what is it, the 18 that you're pending. But again, some cash is not going to surprise them at all. I mean, it's just part of the cost of doing business. They would then, having gotten their, whatever approvals they need internally to proceed and post a deposit, then they would move into the engineering phase. They would do the traffic study, the wetland study, civil engineering, architectural concept plans, presentations to the design review boards, everything they need for permits. Now, generally what we see is a closing when it's ready to go, permitted and ready to go. So with a developer, the two things that you have to keep in mind, the two trade-offs are information and certainty is money, and time is money. So if you can, the more information you can provide them up front in this package, the better and more reliable your bid is going to be. Then, the time is money. The developer, if they can close later, if you don't mind, or you can have deposits interim along the way, they'll pay you more if, they can wait until they're ready to go. And when I did this for Winchester Homes, our preference was when we have our grading permits and everything. In Fairfax, I don't know, 18 months, something like that. They would pay you, take ownership subject to the covenants that you placed on it and the restrictions, and then they would, proceed with their construction.
With their build-up.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we should talk through and that we'd look for some advice about is how much more would Vantage Hill get if we deferred us getting paid the majority? Not, we'll need some cash flow, as you know, and you've identified that. But if we waited until they actually had the whole thing built and were selling the units,
Yeah.
if we deferred our cash out to then, how much more is that worth to a developer that they don't have to finance the 2.5 or
Yeah.
$3 million or
Sure.
whatever it is that we're.
It's whatever their rate is, and it's, at that point, it's just time, it's not certainty, because you've got your approvals and everything. I mean, when things are uncertain, somebody wants 20% of their money to invest it because it might blow up at any point. When it's down the road and it's just strictly a matter of deferring a cost until they close with the home buyer and then they pay you, what is it per year? Their cost is going to be 9-10%, something like that. But it's not insignificant. It'll mount right up.
Yeah.
It's a cost to them, and they love that.
So it's a potential way that we could maximize our returns.
Yeah, and during that initial 4 months, as we transition into preparing the book, that's what we would decide on. You would go terms. What is this one? This one has terms on description, page 7. Price, feasibility period 60 days, settlement 60 days after feasibility. This thing already had some approvals, but many times it'll be 30 days after they receive their permits for construction, something like that. So, that's information, and certainty is of great value, and time is of great value to these developer guys.
Great.
Your consulting fees, $2,500 a month for how many man-hours?
Well, I'd have
You
you
stated that you're going to be attending one board meeting, so your consulting fees cover attendance at a 2-hour board meeting. How many other man-hours?
I'm thinking, 3 or 4 days a month, something like that.
Okay, so
At least
that's
a day a week.
So that's about 32 hours a month. Is there a scope of services document that you traditionally have for a project like this?
Yes.
Okay. And that'll be presented as part of a final,
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
and you'll clearly delineate what comes in the brokerage part versus what comes in the consulting part.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, this is all part of brokerage. I give this to you. So,
Sorry, help me understand something. What exactly is consulting going to cover?
it's that first 4-month period before we know what is happening, what is feasible.
So it covers discovery, and are you going to write up a report?
We would, brief report, yes, sure, to the board.
So Tom, maybe describe what you think are the artifacts and the products that we will have as a community at the end of 4 months.
Well, we think you would get a couple of conceptual plans from the engineer, as I said here, and a couple of renderings that generally show scale to laymen, because you're not trying to, you want people to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, what's really involved.
And Chris, you were shaking your head, so you're not thinking that's sufficient?
No, I was getting ready to ask a couple questions after that. So
Okay.
I guess the concern I have is for $10,000, it seems pretty lean, okay?
Yeah,
And I want to make sure that we understand what the work product output's going to be and what the process is going to be. Because right now, what I'm looking at is 4 meetings. Are you going to be preparing written materials for the board meetings to discuss? Are you going to be preparing interim reports, final report? are you gonna be conducting any kind of community meetings? Because you have said what your previous team sent up here, that the number one thing they would do, and I'm not hearing anything new on this, is to figure out what the quote community wants. How are you proposing to go through that process under the consulting services part or under the brokerage part? Okay, you're not gonna figure out what the community wants through attending a board meeting, because this is the most number of homeowners you're ever gonna see. So how are you going to go through that discovery process, which your prior team specifically referenced as being critical to this process? How are you gonna do that for $10,000?
We're gonna prepare the package and we're gonna rely on you guys to do a lot of the legwork.
Okay, what does that mean? What
What does
input,
it
what do you require?
It means we have a package, you're gonna have to have some meetings, we can come to some of them. I mean, we can define it more carefully and, you know, we generally looked at this and we tried to keep it very lean. Because we'd like to get the brokerage part of it, that's where you make your money.
Right.
But no, we're not going to convince anybody. And that's not our role. We don't live here.
It's not the role I'm suggesting at all. My question is, how are you going to get the input you need? And what you're telling us is that's really up to us. And the input that you get is gonna be as good as whatever we can provide you. Is that correct?
I would say, yeah,
We
I
being
think that's
defined as,
reasonable.
we being defined as the board through whatever process. they
Or,
go.
or whatever committee that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to work through people. We're not gonna work with in some sort of chaotic situation with a bunch of different individuals.
Okay, but I wasn't implying that. I'm
Okay.
just simply asking what the process is you're gonna go through to get the input that you need to meet the requirements that your prior team set out. So I think you've given me the answer I'm looking for. It's gonna be up to the board to provide you with that feedback.
Yes, and we'll give you materials to help you do that.
Okay?
And we can give we will have engineered plans and, you know, we could stake it out, I'm not sure. I can't speak for the engineers. They might be able to stake out something roughly, what we're talking about. And drawings, sketches, we can do a 2 or 3 page description of the project and what the process would be. Happy to do that. But yeah, you guys are gonna have to circulate it and get buy-in. We can give you tools, we're not gonna jam anything down the community's throat.
Nobody's implying anything.
Okay, so.
Yeah, what Chris is asking for is, Chris is asking for a lot of granularity and a lot of very specifics defining what the steps are, what the processes are, what the artifacts that you're gonna be generating, the sort of the nuts and the bolts of it. So I think that part of, and I don't mean to speak for you, Chris, so you're certainly welcome to pipe up, but I think part of what some members of the community are concerned about is that they're seeing a process that is somewhat loose and somewhat informal. And as we get towards something that is, you know, rubber on the road, I think that there are members of the community who are gonna want something that's a lot more formal and a lot more specific and detailed.
Well, yeah,
Is that a fair, accurate, is that a
That's
fair?
accurate, and I'm a little bit concerned by some of the comments I've heard here tonight about chaotic stuff. I mean, I think you're twisting some of the words that I'm very clearly stating here. So I'd be a little bit concerned if the impression that comes across is that, you know, we're asking for a heck of a lot of specificity that is just, you know, kind of too much work or a heck of a lot of time. And, you know, this is a $3 million project, and maybe it's a small project in your world, but it's absolutely critical to the success of Vantage Hill in the future, according to what I've heard at board meetings. So I'm looking for a little bit more specificity as a homeowner and as a member of one of the 2 buildings that will be most affected as to how stuff is going to work. How exactly are we going to get to God? Because we've had a process that's going on for 3 years now. There's very little documentation, very little transparency, very little stuff that's been shared with the membership except on the most sort of rote basis. So this is where the rubber meets the road, okay? And we're looking to figure out from the money we get for a $3 million project, exactly how is this going to work? I don't think those are unreasonable questions.
well, no, but, I mean, and that's what we were saying, is, you know, you need to get some specificity, you need to get the rubber on the road, so that the community has something specific to look at, I don't know.
I'm sort of looking at it like, we do these 4 months, we get an engineer to give us certain parameters that could be used. Then we know if we're gonna use 1.5 acres or 2 acres. We know if we're gonna steal some of the parking lot. So then, by the time we get to the end of these 4 months, we have those parameters to work with. And then before we go to the community, even though I'd really like to see a lot of people become interested in this whole process, but people are complacent and they want it handed to them, the information. So I think until we have the concepts of, we have this kind of this choice by this developer, this choice by this developer, this choice, and with these, we're gonna make this much money, and we're gonna be able to buy all new windows, and we're gonna be able to replace all the common wiring, something like that. That's what's gonna rally the community to come in. But I don't see it at all something that we can hand to them as far as a general, what would you like to see on the property? Because there's 150 owners, there's gonna be 150 opinions, and nobody's gonna agree. So I think we have to take it almost down the road before we go out to the community.
So let me add on that, because what she's raising is a very critical point, and this was covered with your team last time, where we're looking for additional help to communicate to the membership, because that is an absolute, gonna be a deal breaker, and she's hit the nail right on the head. And when your team was up here last time, okay, they said that, you know, they could go hire somebody, a PR expert or whatever, to take over this. So I want you to think about that, but let me just clarify something, what I am looking for. I'm looking for a plan, okay? I was expecting you guys to show up here with a plan. It says this is how it's gonna be done, because nothing I've heard tonight is any different than what your team covered essentially 3 months ago. It's a little bit more informal, it's a little bit nicer, but I haven't heard anything new here. We're looking at townhouses, okay, and we were talking about condos, and I don't get the sense of a plan, a process that you can point to, that you can walk the members of this board through and say, guys, this is how it's gonna work, this is how long it's gonna take, here are the key risks along the way, this is what we gotta watch out for. How are they gonna make a decision if they're not informed as to what the process is?
So are you talking about the process?
I want a document, Parker. I want a document that somebody's gonna walk us through, that Fraser Forbes is gonna explain how stuff works and convince us that they're the best person to walk us through that process. I'm concerned that the members of the board, and frankly the community, just don't understand what it is.
So you're talking about the process, after?
No, I'm talking about, after we sign a contract with this guy, what is he gonna do? Tell me exactly what that process is gonna look like. We covered this, okay? We specifically covered this in our earlier meetings, and maybe, I'm sorry if I didn't make myself clear, but fine, I haven't seen
And the
it.
board has the graphics that Rob and I put together
Okay, but it's
based on
not
your
been
input.
shared with any of the membership, Parker.
So, I have to send that back to the board. The board has the responsibility to communicate with the membership. I've encouraged the board with a communication strategy. I think that that's something that they have as part of what they're gonna be doing. So,
Okay, we'll
excellent
cover that.
input, we'll cover that.
We'll cover that
as
later,
the
believe
board. But in terms of what you're seeking from Fraser Forbes, or in terms of what you think is a good process with Fraser Forbes, let's pretend that we're gonna move towards an agreement with them. Let's pretend for a minute that's the way the board wants to go. What do you want as a document from them?
I wanna see what the process is gonna be.
And when you say the process, you mean the process?
I wanna see process, I wanna see timelines, I wanna see what are the key risks that we need to look at. I wanna know what we're gonna get for the money that we're spending. I wanna see milestones along the way. I wanna see a project plan. This isn't that difficult to put together. This is something that these guys should be able to put together in a reasonable morning.
Yeah, just a general, a full proposal.
Yeah, for this phase of the project, basically. For the
Yeah, we can
consulting
look at our
project,
development
which is getting
services
us from
contract.
here to,
If you think we're ready to look at contracts and stuff, if this is the way you're going,
well,
if you're
after we have a
talking-
discussion, that would be the next step, obviously.
yeah, to do a formal proposal, we can,
Correct.
show you the standard. I mean, we have proposals, as documents.
Yeah.
We can give you a timeline. But again, you're at a pretty early stage, we think. I mean, this in general is what you need to do, we believe, and would be a modest cost way to go about it.
Right, your proposal.
Yes.
This is a way of getting to where we are without huge cost expense.
So I think I'm hearing from you, Tom, in the event that we want to move forward, or in the event that we want to continue moving forward towards an agreement, you could come up with a formal proposal
Yeah,
as
as
part
contract,
of-
we'll show you what the contract's gonna be. I mean, you know, we have those.
with the timelines, with the steps, a discussion of risks. These are all things that you could put into it.
Yeah, if that's the direction, if that's the general direction you wanna go, but it's a two-way street. I mean,
That's absolutely appropriate.
yeah, I mean, is this kind of direction you wanna go, or is this just, you know,
Can we tell you that tomorrow?
oh, sure, anytime. Yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
think
no, no,
that-
talk it, you know, talk
I
it
think that
over.
as the community has a discussion, you know, if Chris is here, and yes, we'll get to a place where we're gonna have the more formal kinds of documentation that he thinks is gonna be appropriate for the project and for the board and for the community to have, and I agree that the community is gonna need that kind of information, although they may not read it, but at least we should have it prepared for them so we can walk them through it. You know,
We have
if
to
your,
get
if your
them to
answer is
read it.
yes, we can do that, then that is important information for the community to have. If the answer is no, we're not interested in doing that, then that may have a factor, that may be a
Well,
factor in it.
Hang on, I guess I'd like a straight answer. Why are you hesitating? Why did you not want to do this? Why do you think it's inappropriate?
Why, what is inappropriate?
To put together a project plan to explain to the board what it is you do for them on what time frame. You're hesitating. I'd like to know why.
No, well, I mean, we just
You
have
said
to
if
do it.
that's the way you want to go, why would we not want to go that way?
No, no, no. If this is the way you wanna go, a consulting, approach. No, if it's serious. I don't know. I mean, you've worked on this, and then we don't hear, you know, we don't know if the community is running hot and cold. We felt that we'll look at it broadly, and then you want more specifics. If that's appropriate, we'll give you more specifics, and we're happy to. But I don't see how we,
Actually, because certainly they don't want to go to extraordinary effort if we're just going to sort of glance at it and go a different direction.
yeah. I mean,
I
you,
think- I
okay,
think
you want me to
that's
prepare
fair.
a proposal? You owe me an answer if you think this is reasonable, kind of costs the community wants to incur. If it's not, you know, maybe there are other ways you can go. I can't, you know.
Yeah.
We've sort of laid out the steps.
Yeah, no,
I don't you know, we're happy to prepare a proposal. We have, you know, again, we have documents electronically, obviously.
yeah. So you can do that.
But we talked about it internally and we said, we need to flush out a little bit how serious Vantage Hill is about really doing this.
Yeah,
Right.
that's understandable.
Yeah.
Not a binding agreement. We're not asking any sort of commitment, but just a feel anyway.
I think it's safe to say we're very serious. We're totally committed to doing this. However, we weren't sure who we were going to do it with.
And that's fine. Well,
And
you know,
so that's where we're at with it. But
absolutely your privilege, and as you narrow it down, let us know. And if it's narrowing down to us, fine, we'll do a proposal.
it's very
I
narrow.
mean, you know, okay. But, you know, again, I think we've given you a general roadmap of how you might go about it, and we try to keep it very minimal cost, because, you know, it's a small community, you're asking people, you know, I guess you have to have assessments to pay for things.
Yeah, no, and you know from all our discussions, we're trying to do this with as little, if preferably no cash outlay whatsoever, but you've done a good job of bare boning it, if I
Yeah.
can call it that.
Right, but,
How comfortable are you on, I apologize, I missed the first part, maybe it was covered there. The engineering work to get kind of the preliminary drawings and some of the concept work, right? And yeah, I read it, it's like, yeah, it's like 10 grand. My question is, how comfortable are you? Is that a real number?
I think it's
Is that a
pretty,
doable
yeah,
number?
we've seen it before.
Okay,
If you want us to, you know, our next step is to talk to some engineers and say, here's the site, what do you think? we
And
can
that's
certainly-
consistent, that's a figure that's consistent with what two law firms told
okay,
us
same kind of.
when we were talking about preliminary, doing a
Yeah,
discussion.
Yeah, these guys are doing it partially to marketing. They want to, you know, they want
And then
the
they
larger,
come in and get the
the
larger.
larger work. And obviously you try to just sort of get it for nothing.
Right.
You can.
Yeah.
But,
But- Okay, so that's a number that's a doable number.
I would certainly think so,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, and I
Now,
presume for the consulting fee part, you know, that part, the engineering part, we can probably, our problem is really how much can we do without an assessment? Actually, it's not an assessment, it's without a vote. An assessment would be easy, the board can do an assessment, okay? But we actually can't spend more than X dollars without a affirmative vote from the association.
So
Which is almost impossible, that's really the hard thing to get.
So the entire budget that he put up is 18.2, which is within the threshold that you had established.
Yeah, and I think that's doable. I guess my question would be, you know, the payout for the consulting part, you guys would defer until after the close, right?
No, we want to be paid as we go along.
Okay, you would want to be paid, okay, so that is not contingent on the
It's
close.
minimal,
And then I
but, and we would want it
misread that.
to make sure that
Just
everybody,
the broker's part, gotcha, okay. all
the
right.
brokerage, yes, which is the big part of it, is at the closing.
Okay, okay, so you would be looking for a small.
And we said we'd rebate the
Okay,
consultant
got
fee
it.
at the closing, so.
So
Okay.
if
But what
it's
we want to make, we're using money as a means of testing and forcing the community to come to grips with it.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct, which is, I understand it.
we had, he has to go on to Annapolis tonight, so we had committed, we'd have him out here by 8 PM.
Yes.
Other questions for him, not to turn off the conversation, but are there any other questions for Tom, or can we release him to his future obligations?
Thanks for coming.
Sure, and
Thank you.
Parker, just let me know if there are further questions or anything else.
So I think we're getting to a place, Tom, where this is gonna start to transition out of my hands and into the board's hands. Because now we're getting to a place where it's going to be board actions, and one of the things that a previous board was advised was a volunteer cannot be representing the board, which is why I've been very careful of how I characterize things. So I'm not saying that we won't continue to have conversations, but just be prepared that as time goes on, we're gonna have to start doing things more formally with the board. I've been helping to facilitate things, but at some point it
Is that a
becomes.
good thing or a bad
You're
thing?
stuck with us.
You're bored?
It's an interesting question.
Okay.
Great, well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, sure, thank you for scheduling it around
Great.
And we'll
my son's swearing in.
In Annapolis?
we'll be back in touch with you.
Yeah, just as a lawyer. Probably finish law
Just
school.